All right, so carrying on, let's talk about hybrid logistics. This is my next mode of communication, and I'm going to be welcoming on to this particular half hour my good friend, Felicia Rattray. If we can find her and unmute her and get her on camera. I know Doug is on that. There you are, Felicia. Okay, great. Hey, hello. My good friend. Okay, so Felicia is the founder and president of Permission to Succeed Education Center in Florida. And let me just introduce you, and you say hi, and then I'm going to wrap you back in, Felicia.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the Hybrid Logistics Project is why we invited Felicia on the call today, but also she won an award for being totally innovative this year in our survey. So the Hybrid Logistics Project was confronted with what was happening with the pandemic. We got calls from all over the country. And its why is really, how do you create equity through study time adjustment? So one of the districts you heard from today, Meriden, has transformed time with how much time they block into math. So they've done it sort of within a traditional sort of master schedule, but they're playing with time. And we're starting to see this more and more. So that's what started coming up during the pandemic. And then how do you create personalization by customization, which is what Safari was just talking about? How do you tweak on the fly and really cause intersection with human teaching so that it's very precise, right? Like, this kid's obviously in a loop over here and needs some fixing. So freeing up teachers to do more direct instruction, roaming, meant to us very succinctly, how do we disrupt the class? How do we take this 200 and some year old manufacturing model, which is thou shalt move along the manufacturing line by your age? I'm sorry if you're in 5th grade and you're really in 2nd grade math, right? You just have to try to keep up, and we'll give you some extra materials, but here's your 5th grade lesson. Okay. Doesn't work really for a lot of kids. And what ends up happening is that it demoralizes teachers who say to themselves, I got to sort of shut off the fact that I just failed these 3 kids to save these other ones, right? Because I got to focus on the group, not the individual. So how do we really focus on the individual? So those were the questions that came up, because a big bright light was shined on everyone during the pandemic as to practice and what it was really meaning for people, and parents were seeing things, and practice was open to the public. So Felicia was on a journey. And before I get into what it is that we're really talking about, Felicia, why don't you weigh in on what was going through your mind as you started your school? What were you looking for?
Wow. I wasn't sure if what I was looking for existed. I had a vision of every student being able to get the help that he or she needed in the moment, on demand, right then and there. And so it seemed unrealistic, but I still had that dream, because I started my school with the concept of trying to find help for my nephew, who is on the spectrum, and he needed the public school system to slow down long enough for him to get it. And as you said, the pandemic shined a big light on what wasn't happening. We had good intentions in the school system, but it just wasn't working. So I was hoping to I wanted to create an environment for that, for my nephew and all other students like him. And it was hoping that I could find a system that could do that. I struggled because for the first 2 years of having my school open, I didn't see a system like that. And it was me up all night, looking at reports, me and my team of one staffer other than me. We were constantly looking at different reports because we were using different platforms. We wanted to individualize every student's experience. I started off with 5 students, then it grew to 10, then it went to 15, and now it's 40. And so if it had not been for me, for me finding you, my experience would have probably made me crazy the way I was doing it, because that just each child had a different curriculum, because what worked for one child didn't work for another. So I could not use that one curriculum for everybody. I have about 7 different curriculums that I'm currently using in 7 different ways, split among the 40 students. So the biggest challenge was knowing and preparing for each child each day. What did I need to do? What were we going to have to do for the child the next day based on the data that we saw the day before, in order to provide that on-demand teaching?
Yeah, and they're every age, right? You got
Every age, from
Yeah.
pre-K to 12th grade.
Yeah.
And 9th graders, I just recently, Leilani, I just recently enrolled a 9th grader who is on a 2nd grade level. So again, having to individualize and find the worksheets and find the platforms, for him, along with everyone else, without the No Story system, would have driven me crazy.
Yeah, totally understandable. So we were hearing this kind of thing everywhere, and then you and I ran into each other. And yeah, so let's talk about what we're talking about. So let me show everybody a few things. So first of all, there's a history to this, and a lot of the people that have spoken on this particular event earlier today, they were with me in this journey, like St. Vrain and Meriden and quite a few others, where along the way for the last 9 years, we've written a lot of special reports about where education was inevitably going because of the convergence of technology, what an algorithm can actually do in high-tech systems to provide recommendations engines, to maneuver you through a workflow, in advanced courseware and all that kind of stuff. And then juxtaposition against the way schools have traditionally been, which you came from a traditional district, Felicia, so you know this. But then we played this game. You can see a picture of it on the screen right now, where we invented a game where we said, let's throw out the old structure and let's see what would happen to have every kid on their own individual path if we maneuvered so that they were all in a homeroom, and maybe you have 4 or 5 homerooms on your campus, because you got a lot of ages and a lot of kids. But you have a study base. There's like a base room where everybody goes. This is not unlike homeroom or study hall, it's called in some places. But then they're flighted out for meeting style events that are the classes, right? Or classroom time, or maybe they're long, like a whole lab where you got to get dirty and do stuff. Or maybe they're short. Or maybe the teacher comes swooping in because they're seeing on their dashboard something's going on with you, and they pull you aside to a little meeting space in the main room, fix whatever's going on with you, and then swoop back out and do more customizations until their next meeting. So we played a game. And we also did this at ISTE this last year. And there's a lot of input from, a huge number of districts as to how this would go. And we gave everybody roles. And the roles were like, you're a teacher, you're a student, you're this one over here, blah, 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 blah. You're a house leader, the person who's like overseeing everybody, doing everything, and yanks a teacher in to go handle this kid at one time or whatever. And people were excited about this. So Learning Council went and started implementing it as a test production capacity in nostory.com. And the reason we did it is because when we looked under the hood, we saw that what schools nationally were doing, as the pressures mounted on them for flexibility, is down here in the lower box. Traditional schools would cut programs like bye-bye music and other stuff because they can't get the teachers, and people want flexibility and change, or they would add another program, or they'd swizzle something else around, right? Or they close some schools, like a lot of the places in Chicago and New York right now are having to do. The next thing they try to do is they move to the right here, the right box is the state goes, okay, my traditional schools are failing. I'm going to stand up a whole bunch of charters. I'm going to license a whole bunch of alternatives. I'm going to microtize the market, right? Which people do want. They want more of a home-like environment, smaller. Smaller's better right now. This is what culturally we're leaning towards. So we advised, listen, if you want to move from teacher-centric to student-centric, you're going to have to start understanding a matrix digital array, an architecture of things working together cohesively to change your structure. So we're going to be talking about that a lot this year. But then we discovered that the highest level would also change the how you lay it out, just like our game did, right? Like how you physically execute in building as well as remote. And that had to do with a logistical function that would manage time and space differently than has ever been seen before. And we had to invent that with the help of a whole lot of people. So the big idea is essentially moving from that traditional structure to a structure that uses homerooms as your home base. So where you're doing your studying, your next assignment is this, go into this courseware module and do this. Okay, now you got to read that. Now you got to watch this thing, video on your screen. And when you get that done, press finish on the screen. And then you're enrolled in this upcoming meeting. But the meeting's going to wait until 5 of you get there. Okay, out of 30 that have been invited, it's going to deploy a meeting because that's the size the teacher wants at every 5. Okay, so behind the scenes of that is a whole lot of calendar algorithms. How you would do that, how you would know the target interval period between target 1 being set, this 5 deployed, had a meeting with the teacher, went back to their homework. Then this 5 deployed, where was that meeting? And where, is it the next day? Where is it? And there would have to be a compiled set of lessons. The teacher would have to know what they're instructing, and they would have to build in advance. They would probably have to build the whole year out. And hopefully all of K through 12 if they're K through 12, because that way, like Felicia just said, somebody in 9th grade who's on 2nd grade math can be there with no sort of emotional repercussions because nobody else knows, right? It's just, that's what they're on, and they're deployed to their meetings that needed, and that kind of thing. You still wouldn't need human intersection, because what we heard all during the pandemic is that we got social emotional loss. Humans need humans, especially the little ones, right? They really need this. I can't even say that necessarily about teenagers. Teenagers do too. So we need to have human intersection. How would we ever change the block schedule? We have to be on block schedule. We can't change the way we do things because human teaching is everything. Okay, well, yes, but let's see precisely what human teaching is really needed for. Well, it's needed to fix you when you don't get it. It's not necessarily needed to be the distributor, the lecturer all the time. Lectures are still permissible, like we do need some of those, and it depends on the subject. But let's get more precise. So the big idea is about auto cohorting. That's what hybrid logistics really boils down to. It's the on-demand teaching to cohorts. Cohorts of 1 are okay, right? Which is really the way, Felicia, you're set up the most. But you could also cohort within your traditional grading school structure. So teacher, study this, and her first cohort arrives and she needs to spend 10 minutes with them. Second cohort arrives 10 minutes with them. So still within the 45-minute Carnegie unit block schedule, but kids are still disaggregating automagically based on their pace, right? Or you could go to some variant of the whole school manufacturing model and moving to a complete restructure physically and technologically, or some mix in between, which is what hybrid high flex is called. So a lot of schools and districts have been talking to us about, okay, I think I understand this technology, which I'm going to tell you more about in a second, but there's no way I can get there from here, right? Like people would go insane, their hair would start on fire and they would run out of the building screaming, so it's not going to happen. I can't talk to you anymore. Well, that's not what we're saying. some of them have realized they could potentially pilot in one subject, one grade, or they could move extracurricular into a restructure, change their block schedule. So there's a larger block at the beginning of the day. That's where you put all that. You put all your remedial in there too. So your ninth grader who's in second grade math can get the attention they need. But you got to change a little, right? Time and space. And then you can incrementally increase the way you change time and space if you're a big district, right? All right, so this application is very flexible as well. So how it actually works is that the teacher creates a meeting to set on the calendar, okay? They've got their lesson, they create the meeting, and all the learners get invited. This is a rostering function. So learner A does what you told them to do, module, read something, watch something, however long your instructions are, step one. When they finish that, they hit finish, or maybe they answer a question, or 2 or 3 or 10 mini assessment. And when they're done with that, that mechanism enrolls them in this cohort. Now, so maybe they're the first one in, then the rest of it arrives. The meeting will automatically trigger to the teacher calendar and the student's calendar at the next available moment for however long a time that's been preset. It watches out for every other meeting, but it sets there. Then your next cohort arrives, and so forth until all students that are invited are completed. But they've already moved on to another step, and the same cycle begins. So you could set as many as you want. You could also set one magically in the middle of everything, which would automatically enroll all the kids. So if you see failure rate happening in a whole group's journey, you could intervene with an instant meeting for everybody. So that's actually part of the technology too that was told, we were told that had to be being done. So it's the same thing that every teacher does in America now, which is they lesson plan. They say, step one is this, because you got to understand this before you can understand that. And then this, right? Whatever their steps are, it's the same as has always been done. And then it's a meeting. So in classrooms all over America today, we basically have come together and then get told what to do. You could still do that in a system like this, where there's a come together moment to launch everything, but then everybody doesn't have to be together while they're doing their reading and their they could be overseen by somebody else, or they can even be remote. Depends on how old they are, obviously. You have to have kids being overseen, but that matrix of who's doing what when, overseeing the student as they're doing their study, individual study, is completely flexible for time and space. So we ran into this along the way of even discussing this, and that is you have to organize your learning. You have to organize what you're doing. Like you can't just sort of over the weekend figure out what you're going to teach next week, right? Like what standards I got to do. You got to figure yourself out, which is also the direction the entire market is going anyway, right? Because they've got duplicative software. The teachers are all doing different things, so you can't have analytics to figure out what's wrong with any kid because everybody's using different materials and different methodologies and different practice, and it's a mess. So the districts that have sort of figured this out, like Tricia and Kate were just talking about, they jumped on board with a LORE, Learning Object Repository. A lot of other districts are doing things in similar ways, but it's all boiling down to let's get organized, right? And actually know where we're at. Because once you build the highway, now you can have a ninth grader and second grade and accelerate them through attention, right? But until you do that, you're still going to be whole grouping, and some kids will fail. Failure is the #1 cause of attrition, right? You're losing those kids to alternatives, and the alternative market is going nuclear right now. There's 9 states that are passing choice legislation, and this is a real threat horizon, especially for public education. Okay, so let me give you an example of meeting setup just so you really start thinking with this, okay? Because now you need to, your mind professionally as an educator needs to go in the direction of, oh, we're going to alter time and space. Never thought that way before. Technology is now taking us into a mutation level that we've never thought with before. So let's say you had 4 learners in flexible cohort. What I mean by flexible is if you set your system or this meeting to trigger at 4, And 4 of them reached it by 3 o'clock that afternoon at the end of the school day during their study period. The meeting would set, let's say your window is 10 to 11 tomorrow for a meeting with the teacher. It would set for a 10-minute meeting, or this is a 20-minute from 10 to 10:20. Okay, because there's nothing in that window right now. So it says there. Then over the night, 3 more kids arrive. They finish that. Instead of not having them join the 4, the teacher has the option to increase the cohort. Okay, so the 4 triggered, the teacher says, I'm okay with taking 3 more, or I don't want 3 more. I want them all to be only 4. Okay, so this is how complex this stuff gets. So you'd also set your first target. You'd say, here's what I want you to study. Please complete this by X, right? So they know it's got to be done by Tuesday, and it's Monday today. It's supposed to be done by Tuesday. So they know their target. This one says target is, set, for the certain time, Wednesday, 10 a.m. 5 kids get there. 4 learners were required, but it sets for all 5. Okay. The auto interval for the next target is every 40 minutes. You could set it daily. You could set it by weeks. And you would then also allow auto cancel to go in, which would allow it to trigger at target with any number of learners. Okay, so that means it's just going to reset another target, another target, another target. So you can kind of see the way this went with these 20 learners. 5 got there, they had their meet. Another 7 got there, they had their meet. 4 got there, they had their meet. 12 got there, and they're 2 and then 2. Okay. I know this sounds complex, but this is what teachers are trying to do live right now when they're trying to auto cohort in the classroom. This would do that for them. Okay, so let's look at this a little bit more in a little bit more complexity. So lesson sequence dynamics, these little colored things, this orange colored thing on this calendar is the start date. And the cohorts were setting the next Monday, right? 3 of them set, and then another one set on Tuesday, another one set on Wednesday. That tells you how different the pace is of those students. So the ones that were up here that went early, they're probably the early ones in the next step, the next lesson, and so forth. And the teacher's attention is predictably now on the ones that are running behind, or the ones that are so far ahead that they need additional materials. If you're attempting to try to keep the group generally together, you would take those kids that are way out in front, they just keep clicking through lessons and meet. You'd give them more, right? You need a challenge. And the ones that are way behind, you're focusing in on what's going on with you. Like, we need to fix this, right? This is where this technology supports a teacher from time and space and attention. Okay. Actually, I meant to go to the next one. So a sample students week might look like this. Like, see, Monday they got like 4 meetings. Tuesday they had 3. Wednesday they had way more, and so forth. They all can be on their own schedule. So maybe they need more time on math. So they're told, listen, you need to spend an hour and a half every day on math. On language, not so much, because you're ahead in that. So we're only going to get half an hour on that today. Okay. So that can be adjusted also on the fly. So you can use, as a school or district, you can use a full block schedule, or you can have meetings set in what has now been invented called a hold. A hold is any length of time minus breaks or transit periods. So if you are using a traditional block schedule, but a math teacher is there, for a longer window, and they can take a meeting at any time during that window, then you just minus out, like, this is a transit break between blocks, or this is lunch, right? So we don't want to set a meeting during lunch. So they can use what's called a hold. So this is all envisioning a world of Uberized learning and for local schools, as well as global talent access. So for on-demand learning. So that could be done by homeschoolers. It can be done by districts and schools. You could even involve your distant freelancers into this matrix, because managing time and space is no longer dependent only on your block schedule for talent as well. So this is a different model to think about. And then I'm going to get into teacher recognition, but I only have a couple more minutes. So I just want to bring Felicia in for a second and then see if there's any questions from any of my attendees about what it is that we're talking about here, because it's hard to understand, first of all, what's happening with it until you actually experience a system of it. But definitely the flexibility is, there's an awareness out there about that. Felicia, any other comments?
No, other than the No Story platform basically is a one, what is that expression? One-stop shop platform for me. And I know I'm different in the sense that I'm small. I'm a micro school. I'm a micro private school. And so I don't have all the resources that a lot of big schools have. However, No Story allows me to be able to put the platforms that I am using into No Story, schedule it all out, have it already there, planned out, and it's adaptable. So it makes me feel like a big fish, even though right now I'm micro, and it's just a game changer. And I can't say it enough. And I can see how it can definitely be used in the public school systems if they can just create a lot of little home rooms to make this work for them. It's definitely a game changer.
Yeah, and I see them all moving in the direction of trying to be more flexible with time, but they hit a wall, which is their traditional block schedule. And if you can't stick with the block schedule, then you got to go over there with the online kids. Like we were talking earlier with eCollier, right? Virtual school. But the blending between the two rails is not, really fluid, right? It's we don't live in a two-rail world anymore. And you've got like the California schools that talk about this. Maybe they got some kids who are artists or movie actors, right? Television actors. They got to have a fluid schedule, but they also want some human interaction. They want to be with other kids, right? So how do you do this, right? So this is what this technology was attempting to confront, is how do you still create intersection with humanity without making everything go online? Like, how do you do that? And how do you make sure you pay attention to the individual student, that the teacher is like, I got to have a meeting with this kid. I haven't talked to them in a day, like 2 days, right? So it's automatically causing that rather than the teacher having to like mentally juggle. It's very stressful for teachers when you tell them, please auto cohort kids together in your class and mix it up all the time, constantly. Really? Because I've been trained in a whole group teaching and learning, and now I got a small group my way, like on everything. I don't, this is like, I'm stressed out, right? This is hard. So let's see if anybody else wants to comment on this. Raise your hands, let us know kind of what you're thinking about. But this is your overview of the technology. Okay, I don't see any questions. So I'm going to thank you, Felicia, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm super excited for you. And I'm going to move on to my next class of awards, the teachers.